Hello. Thank you everybody for coming out. Appreciate it. Do you want me to go ahead?
Are you ready to go first? Yes.
I think I'll go first. All right. So I'm gonna read from the book that Erica is so kindly holding up for you. I'm gonna start in what's kind of the third chapter. The book kind of toggles back and forth between Afghanistan and Iowa, and I'm gonna start in Iowa City, and this chapter is called Against the River. Sergeant Randall backed his pickup into the motor pool, got out, dropped the tailgate, and asked who all wanted a Coors. Several guys indicated they did, so I decided I should probably have one too. I put down my shovel and took a break from filling sandbags. Sand was piled in the middle of the motor pool, bags were piled beside the sand, and we filled one with the other. Orderly and simple, like things were supposed to be in the military. Humvees, deuce and a halves, 5-ton trucks were parked in neat rows along the chain link fence, each vehicle's side mirror almost touching the mirror of the vehicle next to it, all down the row. Big pile of sand in the middle of the lot, and us, and Sergeant Randall's pickup. This on a Wednesday night in Iowa City in June 2008. The creek on the other side of Clinton Street was rising. The creek fed from the Iowa River, which fed from the Mississippi, which would soon spill into its 100-year floodplain, and soon after into its 500-year plain for the second time in my life. The river now doing every few years what it was only supposed to do every century or every few centuries. And in the middle of this total disregard for history, there was us. We were going to build a barricade. By then, I was 20 years old, an English major at the University of Iowa, on friendly terms with shitty beer. Drinking it on duty made me nervous, but I talked myself into it. I figured Sergeant Randall used to be in the Marines, and the Marines did whatever the fuck they wanted. So if he said it was okay, then it was okay. I tapped the can 3 times, cracked it, drank, set it on the pavement at my feet. I shoveled sand out of the pile. Another specialist held a bag open. I tried to avoid nicking his fingers with the shovel. And after each bag we filled, we gulped the beer, filled another bag and another. This was the first night of flood duty, and it was turning out better than I expected. Conveniently, the prior weekend had been our drill weekend, so when the flood came, we already had the proper haircuts, were still in the penumbra of our military bearing. Usually it took me the whole week prior to get ready, undo everything I'd done since the last drill, cut my hair, shave off whatever stupid goatee I was trying out, clean my uniform, find my beret, my patrol cap, my dog tags, stay sober for a couple nights in a row, try to remember a few basic things about what soldiers did. If my uniform looked correct and I could recite a few technical details about the M4 and the M249, I figured I was pretty much a soldier, or at least I could pass for one. And then Saturday morning or Friday night came, or sometimes Thursday morning, and I slipped into the role. The Sunday afternoon of drill, our commander gave a briefing in the upstairs classroom. He told us about Mountain Warfare School coming up later that summer in Colorado. The state rarely had enough money to send the National Guard to good Army schools, but this year funding was available, and the commander reminded us that we should be getting in shape. It was going to be an ass kicker. After the briefings, the commander mentioned how the Mississippi River might flood any day now, and he told us about the opportunity for flood duty if anyone needed the cash, and passed around a clipboard with a sign-up sheet. I was on summer break, living in an apartment for the first time with my girlfriend, Jessica. Our apartment was on the north side of town, uphill from campus, and we were proud of it. We had wood floors, we had groceries, we had a coffee table and a dining table. In the center of the dining table, we had a vase of flowers, which we had borrowed from the Ace Hardware nursery across the alley. A mini fridge in the living room, so the beer was more easily accessible, and friends in town old enough to help us stock it. We had all the right things. The summer promised us whatever we wanted, and I had already committed part of it to the mountain training, so I did not sign up for flood duty. It had been a long, snowy winter, and the hot summer came on fast. No spring. Winter simply shattered into summer. The snow burned up and overwhelmed the water systems, the ground saturated and the rivers filled, and then City Park was under. Then Dubuque Street by the dormitories was under, and the phone tree was activated, and it didn't matter if you signed up for flood duty or not. I was having dinner with Jessica and her family in Des Moines when my cell phone rang. The phone number had 5 digits, which was strange, so I knew exactly what it was. I said I could be there in 3 hours. The admin sergeant told me to pack for 2 days. I arrived at the armory, went up to the office where Staff Sergeant Peterson, a short, grumpy man whose grumpiness I presumed came from his job as an admin sergeant, had drawn a duty roster on the whiteboard. He circled the names as guys arrived. The platoon sergeant, Sergeant Oakes, studied the board with his arms crossed. Sergeant Peterson told me they're all down in the motor pool, put your shit in your locker and get started. I stored my things, went downstairs, and started filling sandbags. An hour later, Sergeant Oakes came outside. He saw the beer. Sergeant Oakes, also an ex-Marine, looked at Sergeant Randall very sternly and said, "Oh, hell no, this is not happening. Get rid of this shit right now." And I had never before seen Sergeant Oakes pissed off, and I thought maybe this flood is going to be pretty serious. We spent 3 days building a sandbag wall around the armory. One day after lunch, guys walked across Clinton Street to stare at the creek. Specialist Maxwell said there's no way we're going to hold it back. It was going to be worse than 93, way worse. Nobody disagreed with Maxwell, but I wasn't convinced. The flood in 93 had been legendarily bad, and it didn't seem possible for a disaster as big as that to happen again, but the water was rising fast. On breaks from building the wall, we crossed the street to stare down at the water, and then we didn't have to cross the street anymore. The water overflowed the banks and crept up the block. The flood came on slow like that at first, and then it happened all at once. On the fourth night, after we finished our wall, after we folded heavy plastic sheets over the sides to make the sandbags watertight, it began to rain. And I'll stop there for now.
All right.
Erica, do you want to take it away?
Everybody give the clapping emoji reaction to Stephen Moore. What year was that?
It's 2008. It was 12 years ago now.
Whoa. I actually was sandbagging that summer too. And so it's funny, like, yeah, I remember that. Stephen and I were kind of adjacent to each other. I'm from Nebraska and he's from Iowa, and there was a lot of rain. And I swear we didn't plan this, but I mean, too hard. But I'm also going to read about a river. And this is going to take us back quite a bit further and a little bit west into Nebraska and the Platte River. And I'm just going to start at the beginning of an essay from Five Plots. It doesn't quite get to 2008. Oh, thanks, Stephen. But it talks about a river and some things that happened there, and some sand too. This essay is called Borrow Pits. The company altered the landscape with a single downward motion repeated 100,000 times. They shifted the earth. Someone ordered a highway. Someone ordered a pool. Someone ordered a driveway, a sidewalk, 4 upright basement walls. They pumped sand from the river to meet the demand. They dug, they extended the reach. The task required them to harvest a thick forest of trees and to demolish what remained of the wilder river landscape. It required sifting the sand free of burrs, tall grass, and remnants of miniature animal bone. The species not yet bone were forced out: white-tailed deer, great blue heron, beaver, muskrat, blue stem, little and big. Nothing could roost or burrow or sing. The grasses lost hold. Machines dotted the skyline. Machines dotted the map. The company performed the final disappearing act. A forested basin fell into a deep hole. Legacy. America is Nebraska, is Arizona, is the heat of summer, and any place with a proper swimming hole. In the mid-'80s, this sensibility guides a retired couple to save up for a boat and rent a mobile home. They lease space on the edge of a man-made lake and sit for an afternoon, cross-legged in the sand. Not 15 miles from home, they have surrounded themselves with water. Their thoughts concern the great fortune of getting away, if only for the weekend. How their lot on the lake feels marvelous, new. With the help of friends, they park the mobile home in the sand and pour concrete for a patio. They drive west now more than ever, following a highway that was once a railroad, that was once a trail, that was once simply a river. The woman furnishes her patio with plastic chairs and half a dozen picnic tables. She serves burgers, hot dogs, and corn on the cob with enough regularity to rival the cicadas. Only the lake seems to change, sparkling amethyst in the afternoon, black currant at dusk. Most nights the water is calm. She decorates with small mementos, seashells, from roadside stands and places seashells should not be. Colorado, Missouri, New Mexico. She tells herself these places were once an ancient sea. In the kitchen, she holds a shell to her ear and listens. The sea stirs and churns, creeps and moans, dances with the pulse of a scientific principle 2, 3. She has lived her life far from the continent's edge, has never thought to consider her home so unlike the milky desert or styrofoam sea. She has never thought to consider this a hole in the heart of the prairie, a landscape no longer recognizable. The decor confuses this further. Sand dollar, pincushion, cactus, and conch. Nebraska is a prairie, is a lake. 1714. The earliest explorers likened the North American prairie to a desert, to a sea, to a violent force they feared they could not control. Until they had cleared enough grass and grown enough trees, it made them feel small and drifting. It didn't take long to suppress that feeling. They changed the features of the landscape completely, beginning with a simple description. Consider the first Frenchman to encounter the Platte. He called the river Nebraskier, a mispronunciation of the ancient Odo word for flat water. He used a translator to make sense of the scene, the place where bison emerged from the tall grass to drink by the hundreds. He described the river as wild. A chorus of voices formed behind him. Other explorers helped complete the transformation, molding the language until the flatness felt familiar. A household object, a single white plate. Tributary. Water in every state demands a physical learning. The Platte slices through the peaks of Wyoming and Colorado before brushing the underbelly of Nebraska. Cutting a sharp course through the continent, melting east out of the Rockies, it dives cold into the Missouri. Here, on the surface of the map, the river looks like nothing. Off the map, the Platte runs a mile wide and an inch deep. It can fool you into thinking there is no water beneath its surface. But we know lakes were dug into the riverbed. The lakes had once been borrow pits, holes mined for finely ground sand and pebbles. Though the holes could have been dug anywhere, they appeared here, on the south side of the Platte, 14 miles to Central City and 15 miles to Berg. I'll go ahead and stop there to give you, that gives you a taste of like a longer, fragmented, 30-something page essay about a river and lakes, man-made lakes that are very special to me in Nebraska. And I felt like, you know, they deserved some literary treatment. And yeah, I think, Stephen, we got to start by talking about rivers somehow.
Oh man. I don't know if I have a question about bodies of water. I hadn't realized that we would overlap in that way.
Start wherever you want to start then. We can like get to a metaphor as we talk. I'm sure of it.
Yeah.
If there's anyone who can do it, it's us.
We'll keep that in the parking lot, a river metaphor. I was kind of curious, like I think some folks that are here probably know, but so we were working together at Oregon State starting in 2014, and we developed these projects starting as thesis projects, graduating in 2016. And I would love to hear a little bit more about what that process looked like for you in terms of spending 2 years with the project in the MFA, and then like how did you kind of pivot forward from that into the manuscript, like the book that we have today?
Yes. Yeah, I'm curious about your answer too, because I feel like writing a book is so personal for every single person who does it. And it's going to be a totally different answer for you than it is for me. But yeah, Stephen and I go way back. We read many of these essays as they were in progress. And we have these dreams of writing a book. I mean, I remember you being really eloquent about what you were working on when we went out to dinner with a visiting writer or something. And then the table got to me and I was like, I hope someday I will write a book. And the writer just laughed at me. But it's not because I wasn't writing. It was just because I didn't know like the final shape of whatever I was working on would take. Did that mean there wasn't coherence there? No. Like I I think that, if we're writers, we're often, especially like, I'm just going to say any writers, but we're nonfiction writers, so I can make it sort of special to us. Like, we're drawn to a lot of the same questions, perhaps, that are driving our work, and same people and places and impulses. And for me, when I was living in Oregon, it was the first time I had ever not lived in Nebraska. I was writing what I knew, and it wasn't something that everyone knew. And it started to feel like really special and precious to me, like this knowledge I had of the place. So all of my essays started to really explore family and my family's roots in Nebraska for several generations, my father's adoption, and then the fact that the landscape of a lot of the Midwest is completely unlike what it naturally was. It's completely changed from the prairie that it once was. And in the river piece that I just read, like all of these man-made lakes have been made, sort of dug into the riverbed. So like my work started to explore what I knew, which I started to learn was like all of these ways that my home was strange and surprising to people who didn't know it. And maybe there weren't a whole lot of essays written about Nebraska yet. And so eventually, I think being in a program started to help me kind of see the resonances between all the different smaller pieces I was writing. And eventually, like when I could see that cohering as a book, it sort of became the book about Nebraska, but also just about what it's like to be a young girl growing up there and witnessing all of those things, and having a family, and having, problematic relationships with friends and the landscape and all of that. So
Can I ask a follow-up question?
Yeah.
So would that have been like when you were putting this together, would that have been like the first time you were getting feedback from a group of writers who were mostly unfamiliar with the place you were writing about?
Absolutely. Yeah, because I had only ever worked with other Nebraskan writers. And so, even a lot of my prairie writing especially is like an homage to my first writing teachers who wrote a lot about the prairie themselves and were like very dedicated to like the literature of the place. And so, yeah, it was. But it was cool that like 2 out of the 4 or out of the 3 people that joined me in the cohort were also Midwesterners.
Yeah, I think that's great too. I think it's great to have like a community of writers who can call bullshit a little bit. Like there was one other person in our group who was also from Iowa, like I was, like a different part of it. And then there was another person in our group who had deployed to Afghanistan, but like at a different time, a different place. And they knew like just enough to like keep me on my toes. And I feel like that's really helpful to have people who have some like connection so that you can't just pull one over on them, but are also learning about your experience.
Mm-hmm. And what was it like for you? Did it change a lot from what you were working on as a student to what became your book, or what was that process like, and what were some of the major changes for you?
It was a little different. I think I cut probably like 3 full essays. I wrote 2 new ones. I had to do some revision. It was a lot like a workshop. I had this pile of feedback from the thesis experience, and I was excited to kind of figure out what each piece's flaws were. And some I didn't change very much, and some I needed to rewrite a paragraph. Some I needed to rewrite a page. There's one essay in here that I rewrote completely, and then there were some gaps where I had to bring in just all new material to try to kind of fill out the manuscript a little bit. But I think I spent about a year writing new material and then pulling it together, and then I spent about a year worrying about the places that I had submitted it to and what they were going to say about it. I was really, really worried that I was going to run out of gas before I'd finished it, like that I would just get I would work really hard on this piece, and then an editor would come back and say, "This is really good, but we'd like you to rewrite it completely." And I just like wouldn't have enough gas in the tank, you know. So I was kind of worried about like metering out my energy. And um, I think eventually I just started pulling books off the shelf to figure out where they came from because I didn't know who made books or published them or how to make one. And a shout out to Grassroots. I'm pretty sure I had pulled Tracy Doherty's "Let Us Build Us a City" up off the shelf, and I was like, "Yeah, University of Georgia. I really like this," and I'm pretty sure I had bought that at Grassroots. So I think I had that reference on my shelf because of them. But that's kind of what it was like, just like taking this pile of notes and being energized to go back to work and figure out like how much does each of these pieces need to be successful.
That's cool. I feel like really putting together a book is like whatever your writer quest is going to be. And like that story that I told about meeting with the visiting writer probably tells you that as a student, I didn't have a lot of confidence in myself or in my work. And so I feel like my quest was kind of like just gaining the confidence to put with the work that I had together in a manuscript and say, it's a book. Because mine is only 5 essays. It's much shorter and slimmer than yours. But the contest that I found was looking for shorter manuscripts, and that kind of gave me the boost that I needed. So yeah. Did you know what you were working on, or that you were working on a book before you came to OSU, or what, like when did you figure out the project and what it was and what was it about? Like when did that light bulb moment happen for you?
Yeah, I came to OSU adamant that I wouldn't write about the military, and then I turned back on that immediately. I really had a completely different project that I wanted to work on, a project that I was really excited about, and um, the moment we started getting assigned like to write full length essays, the first thing that came out was this collage, and it's in the book as it's called Rhino Snot in the book,
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
and it's a lot of these like passages of like 100-word, 250-word pieces, and I'd just be writing like tons of these. I think there's probably like 12 or 13 that are in the essay as it's in the book, but I probably wrote maybe 50 or 60 of them, and they were just really like coming out in kind of a rush, and maybe that kind of told me that the project that I had in mind was not like the project that I needed to write right now. And some of the pieces I could collect and put them together, and they would kind of hang together and be an essay. But some of them, like I knew that's gonna have to be its own. I'm gonna have to spend some time figuring out that moment, like that memory is gonna kind of spider web out in a different way, and that'll have to be its own essay. I'll have to come back to that. And this piece, like these kind of pieces are related to the flood in Iowa City, so I can develop those into a piece. And um, I just had dozens of these really small kind of moments that I realized were connected, but they were going to take a lot of individual attention. And once I started to realize that, I could kind of start to see the shape of the thing come together. But
When was it? Do you remember? Were you sitting on your couch?
no, well, no, I would just like wake up in the middle of the night and be like, oh, there's a scene I should write, and it'd be like 300 words, and that just kept happening, and I just like realized this is a thing. This is going to be a project that's going to take kind of a lot of resources to figure out how to do it. But I think that's kind of what it felt like.
Yeah, I could kind of see that happening too. I had the privilege of being there in the workshop. It's so funny, like how you think that, like we're not as much in control of it as we would like to maybe be as writers, you know. I I remember someone really helpfully telling me what my project was. You know, like, you're writing all of these essays about Nebraska. Do you see that you have the prairie essay and you have the lake essay and you have the, and I just wanted to plug my ears and say like, no, don't tell me that. Because like, if I know what I'm doing, then I'm going to try like way too hard to do that thing. And for me, like just sort of the mystery of figuring it out is part of the process. I don't know if you can hear the thunder behind me, but it's hopefully adding some like oomph to what I'm saying. Very like woo-woo nature of like, you know, writing individual essays and seeing like what those sticking points are. Because I think the moment that I named it, I suddenly couldn't write any more new essays to that theme that fit. Like I wrote more for my thesis, but none of them actually ended up in my book. So, you know,
once you had the name, that kind of gave you like an organizing principle. It kind of gave you the rules about what could be in it and what couldn't be.
And if I was going to call it 5 plots, it had to be 5 essays, and it was, you know, the 5 very best essays that I had ever written about Nebraska that had sort of their, you know, their different lanes and their different things that they were doing. So, yeah. It's just like
more from it.
Yeah. Do you want to go?
Round? Sure.
Okay.
Sure. Okay.
I wonder what similarities we'll find this time.
I don't know. We'll see. This is the piece though that I was kind of talking about where I rewrote this from scratch after the thesis. So like this is kind of post MFA. The chapter is called On Counterinsurgency. From the beginning, the war is a test of patience. On October 7, 2001, in a speech announcing the first aerial strikes of Operation Enduring Freedom, President George W. Bush tells the country, quote, "We will win this conflict by the patient accumulation of successes, by meeting a series of challenges with determination and will and purpose. Our patience will be one of our strengths, patience with the long waits that will result from tighter security, patience and understanding that it'll take time to achieve our goals, patience in all the sacrifices that may come." End quote. The war will take time, and there will be inconveniences. The lines at airports will be longer than before. Young women and men will be killed in the fighting. Others will return home mutilated. Our responses to these events will be the same. We'll wait. Our patience will be a kind of courage. More than that, a kind of patriotism. The war in Afghanistan will take time, but the longer we are there, the more patience it means we have. And the more patience we have, the more courageous we are. And the more courageous we are, the more patriotic. Each passing day will serve as greater and greater evidence of our determination. Each passing month will further demonstrate the immortality of the American spirit. 9 years later. It's June 2011. Operation Enduring Freedom has been enduring for 3,539 days. Children born at the start of the war are now entering 3rd grade. They are learning to multiply and divide. They are learning to spell caterpillar and Wednesday and million and whistle. One morning, 1st Platoon conducts a foot patrol into the nearest village. We are going there for a village assessment, which means getting a lay of the land, meeting the local elders, showing them how interested we are in helping them. Our patrol is the usual thing. We hike from our outpost down the plateau where it is built into the lower valley. The packs we carry are heavy, the ammunition is heavy, the air is hot and thick and tiring. My team leads the platoon formation over the valley's sloping brown hills. 4 teams follow, spreading far behind us. The formation is scattered with a few Afghan soldiers whom we have brought along to prove they exist. We walk in on the main road. Low, dusty compounds stand on our left. The valley's gray western mountains rise up half a mile to our right. Little kids emerge from doorways to stare at us. We stare back from behind our standard issue sunglasses. When the inner cordon is set, the lieutenant takes a security detail and goes to find an important old man or several to speak with. Sometimes finding them is easy, but sometimes an elder is not immediately forthcoming, so the lieutenant has to poke around a while. And in any case, the idea is to discuss what the village needs. Clean water, maybe, or schools, or roads. Sometimes they'll sit and discuss nothing at all, but the nothingness is still very important and deliberate. The lieutenant will make small talk, drink cup after cup of sugary chai, and slowly build rapport and trust so that later the real work can be done. These meetings with elders are called key leader engagements. Engagement is also a euphemism for combat, and for an infantry platoon, we always need this big suggestion of fighting. Every word must verify that we're doing our jobs. All the language must ring with purpose. I stand along the inner cordon. I tell my 3 guys where to be and where to look. I put specialist tailor by the corner of a building, and he looks down the main road. He keeps his rifle and M203 at the low ready. He has his game face on. Specialist Daniels covers down the opposite direction, and I stay between them. If the patrol succeeds, nothing much should happen. And that's how it goes. The lieutenant reemerges, and we hike back to the outpost. Walking up the plateau is exhausting, and by the time we return through the front gate, it's late morning. We clear our weapons along the nearest barricade. I tilt my open chamber to a buddy who says clear, and who tilts his chamber to me, clear, and I let my bolt forward, lock the magazine back in the rifle so that one tug on the charging handle will press around into the chamber. Then I go inside the platoon tent, set the weapon on the floor beside my cot, lie down, yank off my socks, stuff them inside my laundry bag, put up my blistered feet. The sound of the rocket is incredible. It screams low and fast over the outpost and explodes in a deep, loud thump somewhere just outside the perimeter. Half a second passes, and someone yells, "Incoming." So I'll stop there. And Erica, do you wanna give us another piece of your book?
Sure. Thanks, Stephen. I like how is that the beginning of the piece?
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
So you got to read on to find what happens. That's kind of my reading style too. I'm going to read you the beginning of another essay in the book. So you'll now hear the beginning of 2 of the 5, and it's kind of follows the seasons. So this is the other summary kind of one. You got the lakes. I was thinking really hard on the similarities, but you think while I read. This one's called this one is called A List of Concerns. The size of a paper cut compared to its sting. A bandage run under the tap. The soggy reminder. Glue left behind on wrinkled skin. The ways I was told to behave. Don't pick the flowers. Don't walk in the grass. Wear black to a funeral. In lieu of flowers, send money. The apologies I can't remember if I've made. When we were kids, my friends and I had a habit of making long lists. Lists of things we wanted for our birthdays and for Christmas. Gifts we thought our parents should buy. Lists of cities we found beautiful. The places we wanted to go. The beaches we wanted to see. Lists of qualities, of appearance, and of character we wanted in our husbands. Lists of qualities we wanted to preserve in ourselves. We considered the girls we were, the ways we wanted to stay, and the women we wanted to become. Our lists were demanding, the requirements exhaustive. That our framework was inflexible, that we didn't allow for change. Allie, Carrie, and I sat at our kitchen tables with notebooks, markers spilling out of our mother's old Tupperware containers. All of us marked on the table by accident. All of us made a mess. All of us wrote our futures and continued playing the game as if it could keep us in the room forever. As if we could know what forever would be like. We marked up dozens of ruled pages, a new color announcing the arrival of a new idea, numbers and line breaks separating that idea from those previous. At the end of each line, I left my mark, a single exclamation point, and formed its stem into the shape of a triangle. Simple punctuation could not communicate my conviction, my certainty. I shaded my exclamations thick. Sometimes I drew 2 or 3 for effect, louder shouts into the void. The logic of permanent marker. The logic of the list, a form concerned with the failure of memory, a recipe broken down into its parts for the practical purpose of navigating the store, of getting home with exactly what you need and not having to return. The struggle to remember what I wrote in those lists, where I've kept them, or if. That I've lost the paper, that I remember the game, that I remember how it felt to be friends. When we were kids, I probably didn't write, "Someday I hope to be driving a minivan down a rural highway in Nebraska just to see where it ends." And I probably didn't prioritize my desire to wander the fields 35 miles from the rural hospital where I was born. I didn't know that in those fields, a few acres of native prairie grasses remained. This is the situation in which I find myself. The borrowed van. the grass, the highway ending as it does. Driving in the direction of the Prairie Reserve, a place I've never been, I come to a sign that signals a dead end. I'm forced to make a U-turn at the end of the gravel road. I'm not sure how it happened, but I ventured beyond what I came to see. The end of the road, the limitless sky. I still haven't found our prairie. The illusion that along with our families, we lived on the prairie. In school, we studied pictures and drawings, watched movies, and read firsthand accounts. Books about little houses made their way from backpack to backpack and girl to girl. The land, we believed, had never really changed. What we didn't understand was that the prairie couldn't have been further from our experience. By the time we were born, a mere memory. Instead of blue stem, needle grass, or drop seed, we grew up in a little town surrounded by cornfields, bean fields, and once every few summers, fields of golden sunflowers. The prairie had once been, but not in Nebraska anymore. The fact that adventure used to be my favorite word, the fact that it means something different to me now. The fact that the first time I saw a goldenrod flower, my grandfather was pointing to the plant. He stopped driving and rolled down the window on the passenger side of the pickup. "This is our state flower," he said. "Now that you know what it looks like, I don't want you to ever pick it." The childish temptation to break every rule. Goldenrod, blooming in every ditch, every meadow. The selfish act of claiming anything as your own. When we were kids, I remember picking a handful of goldenrod and other prairie flowers to fill out the bouquet. I walked home. Watching pieces of flower fall to the ground, I plucked every pod and petal, tossing them into the wind. I threw the still green stems into the grass. No one would ever catch me holding them. And that's where I'll stop. It goes on for quite a few pages and develops into sort of like a different story. But that sets it into motion. So
Can I ask you about that? I think
Yes.
one of the things I really admire about that piece is how nimble it is. It's just so light on its feet that it's always moving a little bit faster than I expect. And then I'm always like kind of being surprised about where the next part of the list is going to go. And at the same time, like, we're talking about a specific time in the past. We're talking about like a pretty specific place. And I wonder how for you as like a nonfiction writer, do you know, or like how can you tell I'm definitely right now in an essay mode and I'm not in a memoir mode?
Ooh, yeah. So first of all, what is the difference between essay and memoir? That's a tricky one to sort out because like we blend those two kinds of writing so often. Like personal essay has elements of memoir, and a good memoir has like these deep moments of essayistic inquiry or asking questions. I think the thing that always really resonated with me as a writing student is that a cool story, like doesn't make the cut, or like a sweet memory or a troubling memory or something bad that happened to you or something good that happened to you is just like not enough. There has to be something else. And I actually kind of feel that when I'm writing, like I give up really easily on things that don't feel like they have much weight. Like maybe I think they're funny, or maybe it's like really interesting to like go back into the past and write through something that happened. But if I can't figure out like why I'm doing it, or what the larger significance or even artistic merit of that project might be, I just like abandon it pretty fast. And so I always know I'm in the essay mode when I'm asking a deeper question. And I think for this essay, the moment that inspired it was that I went to that Prairie Reserve, and I didn't really expect much to happen, but I had this really deep emotional and like internal experience where I was just walking and thinking about these friends that I had when I was a kid. And I realized that the day that I was there, exactly 1 year before that, my friend's mother had died. And she was someone who babysat me when I was young and I knew really well. And over time, we had sort of drifted apart as friends. And so the question for me was like, what happened? Like, I feel this deep sense of loss and this deep significance being alone here right now, but like, what is the nature of friendship? And like, I really wanted to write into that. And so I knew that that project had legs and I could keep going into it and I could keep asking those questions. And for the river/lake piece, it was about this, lake house that my grandparents had. And my question was like, what do you need to like prove to yourself that you are living the life that you want? Like, is it a property? Is it money? Is it this vacation? Like, is it something to pass on to your kids? And so I think that whenever those two things combine, like, I can really find energy in a project. I don't know if it's memoir or if it's essay. It's that blend that's really fun. And I'm curious what you have to say about this, because you've said essay a few times tonight. Your cover says memoir.
It does. Yeah.
Tell us about that, Stephen.
I think my publisher was getting impatient with me because I was flip-flopping a lot. But I thought of them individually as essays, the 10 or 20 page pieces of them. But then when I started collecting them, I was really front loading a lot of the pieces that have a lot of scene. The first 4 of the chapters in the book are really scene heavy, and they feel memoiristic to me for that reason, because they require so much like memory work and kind of doing the dramatization of memory that I really associate with memoir. And it's more the back half that the project starts to get a little bit more unruly in that way. And I was trying to figure out what the best way would be to set an expectation for a reader that I would probably be breaking in one direction or another. If I called it an essay collection, it would seem like a very memoiristic essay collection. And if I called it a memoir, it would seem like a pretty essayistic collection. I kind of just had to figure out which expectation to create and then like dissolve in some way throughout the project. And I thought this would be the most appropriate. Just because of the way it starts. Like, yeah, this kind of looks and feels like memoir at the beginning, and then it's gonna not be that way the whole time. That was kind of the trajectory that I thought was most fun to try to give for a reader. But I also kind of think of it in terms of like, both modes always make me think like I feel right there with the writer, but in different ways. Like when someone's writing memoir, I always feel like right there with them as a past character. But like when I'm listening to your work, I feel like right there with you as like a writer, like as the narrator working through the project. And I just think those two like ways of involving the reader, or like what you're asking them to think as, are just a little bit different. And I think they can both happen at the same time, or you can toggle between them. But I think you have to have like a primary. You have to have like each piece has to be doing something first. And like whenever you run into trouble, you have to know, what am I doing first? Like both things can be happening, but what's the more important part?
Yeah. I mean, as I was rereading your book too, I was noticing like all the date markers. It very much sets us in, time and place again and again in those scenes. And of course, like diverts from those things. But yeah, I think it's funny that, I rarely mark time like that, but you can still kind of track it, or you can feel that way when you're reading it.
I also then get to hear from people who read the book and then will email me to tell me like, I wanted to go find out where I was on that also exact date. And then they will send me like, I was doing this. I was like, I had this going on, or this is where I was living at that time. That's cool.
So, oh my gosh, how many times has that happened?
It's happened a few times because they're pretty specific, and I think that kind of calls for it. But,
that's a fun thing too. Like, what was I doing on this day? Like, I think that I firmly believe we were sandbagging at the same time against those rivers and against those rains in our geographic locale. Were there any pieces, I mean, you kind of talked about how you were adding to your collection, but was there anything that didn't make the cut? Like, did you have a set of rules that everything in my memoir needs to be doing X, Y, and Z in order to make it into the manuscript? Or were you concerned about reaching a certain number of pages? Or how did you make those decisions?
I cut 2 essays because they were really about writing, and I already had a couple in there already, and I didn't want it to be a book of craft essays. Like, there are a couple of pieces that are very much about Afghanistan, they're very much about the National Guard and military experience, but the lens for the essay is some kind of like craft issue that I'm trying to think through, like, how do we write responsibly from this angle with respect to this subject matter? And they're very like craft essay, like they're very much like crowd pleasers for like other writers, but I didn't want to load the manuscript with those like too many, because there's a couple already, and I wanted to make sure I was leaving room for trying to like get at like insight and meaning for things beyond like the act of like reading books. I wanted to leave space for that, and so that became kind of the standard. If that was the main thing that they were doing, I was gonna have to drop them. But did you have a similar experience? Did you have rules?
Not really. It's just like when I decided it was only going to be 5 essays, it was pretty obvious to me what those 5 were going to be. And I guess, I'm really fascinated with the lyric essay, which is sort of like, this other part of the spectrum that we haven't delved into too much, that like more closely borders poetry. And I think at times your work has elements of the lyric as well, of course. But lyric is also such a broad thing. And so I wanted to represent all kinds of lyric writing, because I think it's more like a quality than like this is what a lyric essay looks like. So the one that I read, A List of Concerns, is actually in the form of a list and is very like, it's numbered. I don't usually read the numbers. I have another one that's, mostly seen. It takes place in a deer blind, but it's like very dreamy and there's a story going on beneath the surface that you don't know. And another one that's divided up into 5 sections, Borrow Pits, which is like very fragmented with all these little titles, almost like a chapbook or something. So I think one of my things was that I didn't want any of the essays to be too close to each other formally. I really wanted to show like a wide range of what I think the lyric essay can do, and show different aspects of, what Nebraska is like.
I think you do it. I think that's what, yeah, I think you pull it off.
So will those essays the craft essays, like, are those like what you're working on now, or what are you transitioning into as a writer? Do you have a next project in mind, and how's that coming together?
The next one is it's much more in the essay collection camp. I'm really excited about it, but the topics are all over the place. You've read a few of them already. There's some about pop culture. There's some about Iowa. There's some stuff about Oregon. There's a literary analysis of like contemporary war literature. They're really all over the place, and I'm really excited to just like go into different topics and try to dig in to whatever it is that I'm really interested in, and then make like a big jump into the next piece. I think I'm about halfway or so. But
do you think that that nonfiction books, like whether it be memoir or essay, like have to have some sort of narrative arc or theme to hold them together? Or it sounds like maybe you're kind of playing with that expectation a little bit.
I don't think so. I think usually they do, just because like if it's one brain like thinking through something, usually that brain is like interested in a certain set of like problems or questions, even if it's broad, even if the theme is like pain or something. Usually there's some through line that like the person is like kind of intrigued about, and you can kind of track it. But I don't think it has to be, and I think it's exciting to kind of hop from one thing to another and see how the thing hangs together.
Yeah, how far can you jump?
Think? Yeah.
And what can you bring with you in your other hand?
Yeah.
Yeah,
What do you think?
I I think that like it has to make sense to the writer. And if the writer can decide like all these things belong together, not this is everything I've ever written and therefore it is a book. You know, like if you have some reason that that some level of that meaning making and that choice will like translate to the reader. Um, I think so. Um, as I said though, I don't like to go with like some sort of destination in mind because it kind of cripples me. Um, I'd rather like set my expectations low and then surprise myself at what comes out.